have the Ayatollah of fantasy rock and roller with us today, Adam Rank. How you doing, Rank?
They look great in person, and I just can't wait till next year where we can pack it full of 25,000.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. I didn't know it was Ball Guys Day. It was being ranked. I mean, how can you lose?
This is the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast.
And welcome to the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast, presented by the Fantasy Points Media Group. This is episode 115, and as always, I am joined by Major Caldwell and Tara Roberts. And hey, our guest today, you may recognize him from the number 5, but these days you can catch him living the stream with CD Carter while putting out one of the best all-around podcasts in fantasy football, and that's the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. He is the Late Round QB himself, JJ Zachariason. How you doing, JJ?
I'm good. Appreciate you guys having me. I'm excited to chop it up and talk a little bit.
Yeah, this is, for those who don't know, we've been doing this Behind the Grind series now this is season 2. We were trying to get Zach on last year. Things just didn't work out, but we are more than happy to have him on this year as we kick off season 2 of the series, which, by the way, in my opinion, is one of the best all-around podcasts out there. Maybe not quite up there with the Late Round podcast, but it's coming in there hot right behind there. Now, JJ, we're going to talk a little bit of the contractually obligated football talk that we have going on here. I know you've got a bunch of stuff different going on here between the new website, which we'll talk about a little bit later there, kind of branching off on your own, and some pretty amazing things right there. And some other things you got going on as well as far as the rookie guide that you put out there all the time. You got living the stream going on, the lateround.com website, and you got your Patreon going on there. So before we dive into the contractually obligated talk, let's talk about that Patreon that you got going on. What do you got going on over there at the lateround.com?
Yeah. So, I quit my job at FanDuel and NumberFire at the end of January. So I decided to branch out on my own. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was just connect with people who have been listening to my show and reading my stuff for a really long time, and just have an outlet for them to do some of the content that I really didn't do a lot of, at NumberFire in particular. And so with the Patreon, it's really a spot where I'm sort of putting rankings together and doing tiers and such, that I just haven't been that much of a rankings person and analyst throughout my career. And so I'm able to do that a little bit, have more of a one-on-one connection, have conversation with people that's not on, the Twitter medium. I think that, with Twitter, as we all know, it can get a little noisy where, you're having a conversation with someone, you're having a back and forth, and then people jump in and people start trolling and people do, it's not the best way of communicating always. It's not a bad way. I think Twitter is way more good than bad. But I just wanted a better spot to have direct one-on-one type conversation with people who want to have those conversations and want to talk about the things that, I'm producing and get our hands dirty a little bit with the data stuff that I work on. So that's what the Patreon's all about. I have live streams on there. I did my first one last week, was a lot of fun. And then I'll do, I have rankings that I drop. I share some data on there that you can't get elsewhere. And so, it's the Late Round Fantasy Football Patreon page.
Well, that almost kind of feeds in perfectly because we want to talk about new faces in potentially new places here. Maybe not quite ranking them, but hey, if you're getting into rankings, this may be the perfect time to kind of talk about where some of these free agents, where some of these players that we're thinking could get traded, where they could end up going, and what is the best fit for them in fantasy football. And to kick it all off, we got to go to the Super Bowl champions there. We talked about Aaron Donald. Is he going to retire? Is he not going to retire? He basically came out and said, hey, if you bring Von Miller back and Odell Beckham Jr. back, we're going to run it back this year. Now, JJ, Odell Beckham Jr., is his best fit the Los Angeles Rams, or do you think he could go elsewhere and have even more success than he had this prior season?
I mean, it's hard to imagine a spot better than LA, I think, for OBJ. He complements Cooper Kupp fairly well. Kupp can play all over the place and will play a lot in the slot, of course. OBJ can play everywhere too, but he's a great perimeter receiver. And I think him and Cooper Kupp complement each other really well. And then you think about what that could look like when hopefully Robert Woods is back and able to come off that ACL. That's a heck of a trio if you're able to keep OBJ there. And the nice part about a McVay offense, I think a lot of people would be a little bit nervous about too many mouths to feed and what that could do to OBJ's target share or even Robert Woods' target share if he's able to come back and play there. I think that the one thing to keep in mind is that Sean McVay loves him some 11 personnel. He loves throwing 3 wide receivers out on the field. He sort of made it at least was a reason why it became so much more popular when he became head coach in LA, a handful of years ago. So we're going to see a lot of 3 wide receiver sets with LA. That's what we saw this year. They were by far the highest 11 personnel team in football. And so if that's the case, then, we shouldn't really have to worry about who that number 2 or 3 wide receiver is. They should see at least some volume in that offense. And obviously if OBJ gets there, then, it would hurt someone like Van Jefferson a little bit because they're not going to throw as many 4 wide receiver sets out there. But I think OBJ in LA with Matthew Stafford is a great spot. And that's why we saw, him thrive to some degree, especially in the playoffs and even in the Super Bowl before he got hurt.
What about DeShaun Watson? I guess 2 questions here. 1, will he be back in 22? And 2 would be, what team is his best fit?
Yeah, I mean, to me, Watson's a player, if we're removing the off the field stuff, which, I'm not, we're looking strictly at the football stuff here, but, Watson's someone who is an upgrade over maybe all but 4 to 6 quarterbacks in football. I mean, it's just the reality of the situation. And so, any team that he's able to go to is going to be an upgrade. I think Miami still makes a decent amount of sense. I think Philadelphia still makes sense. I'm a Jalen Hurts guy, but it's just, reading sort of the right, where there's smoke, there's fire with a lot of these situations. And, I like Jalen Hurts a lot. I think that there's still potential there, but the unfortunate side is teams don't really weigh quarterback rushing the way that they should in terms of the value that it brings. We all know that it brings a lot of value in fantasy football, but it brings a lot of value in real football too. I mean, the year that Lamar Jackson won MVP, the single most valuable play from an EPA standpoint, expected points added standpoint, in all of football was a Lamar Jackson rush, right? And so you can't discount what these guys are doing with their legs. You can't. Sure, you can say that Jalen Hurts needs a lot of improvement through the air, needs to be more accurate, and there's a lot of statistics that back the fact that he, is a below average passer. But you can't discount what he can do with his legs and the importance of that. So, I like Jalen Hurts. This is more me saying what I think teams were thinking. I wouldn't be shocked if Philadelphia is at least on the phone seeing what's going on with Watson and other quarterbacks across the league that have been rumored to leave their teams, like a Russell Wilson. I wouldn't be shocked if they're, looking into something like that. Will he play next year, DeShaun Watson? I mean, it seems like he will. This is just, reading into what these allegations look like and sort of how they're settling them or trending towards settling them. But again, it's one of those things where I certainly don't have the right, I'm certainly not the right voice to say, what's going on off the field at all. But in terms of on the field, yeah, I mean, I think that he'd be a big upgrade for a lot of franchises.
What do you think about Minnesota now potentially getting into the mix of this and how that affects not just DeShaun, but then Kirk Cousins and how he would kind of cascade on through the system of being traded? Yeah,
it's a great question because I think that wherever DeShaun Watson ends up landing is going to have this massive domino effect across the league, because I think what we'll see is if he does go to a place like Minnesota where there is an established quarterback who is above average. I mean, it's not like Kirk Cousins is like this completely horrific quarterback. Another team can utilize Kirk Cousins, right? And so there's going to be some sort of trickle down where eventually you hit a team like the Steelers or something like that or Washington where they need a quarterback, and so like that trickle down would stop. But imagine a scenario where you're going from Minnesota, Watson goes to Minnesota, Kirk Cousins then goes to a team that has like a fringe quarterback, and then that fringe quarterback goes. So you can see how things domino and fall back from that standpoint. But I think that if Watson, I think that Watson is the key piece for a lot of the things that are going on around the league from a quarterback standpoint. And so if if he ends up landing in a spot, let's say, maybe Philadelphia is a bad example, but if he does land in a spot where there's a team, like let's just say that he hypothetically went to Washington, DeShaun Watson, then all of a sudden, like that's it, right? Like there's no more quarterback pieces to move. He's just in Washington. No one cares about what's going on at quarterback existing in Washington. And so, I think that would allow players like Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, them to likely just settle in with their current teams. Like I think there's going to be less movement if Deshaun Watson ends up going to a team that, just needs a quarterback inherently. But if he does go to a place like Minnesota, man, it could really be a fun offseason.
JJ with the Heineke slander. I like it.
Yeah. Look, there's nothing wrong with Taylor Heineke.
Right.
Let's just be real. Let's be real.
It's not the future,
Yeah. Right.
But you mentioned Aaron Rodgers, and that ties directly into my next one. Devante Adams, and whether or not he stays in Green Bay or goes. And I think a lot of that, is very tied into Aaron Rodgers. So can you maybe looking at Devante Adams from a perspective, do you think he'll be able to stay in Green Bay, or they'll be able to keep him in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, or is there going to be a split there and Devante's going somewhere else?
Yeah, so I think that the one thing we got to keep in mind is that there is almost a 0% chance that Green Bay doesn't try to tag Devante Adams, because they're going to want to get something out of Adams here, right? They're not just going to let arguably the best wide receiver in football to just walk and go away. And so, we're likely going to see a tag situation. And then I would assume that Adams would be willing to play on that tag, or, to some degree, at least think about it, if Aaron Rodgers were still there, right? And so my assumption is Adams will be tagged. And if Adams is tagged, it's going to lure Rodgers in a little bit more, than if they were to say, go Devante, we don't want you here anymore. And so I really I think that where we were last year was more up in the air. And obviously the reports are saying similarly, but I think that where we were last year is a little bit more up in the air with Rodgers than where we are this year. I'm fairly confident, or I feel good. I shouldn't say confident. Anything can happen, but I feel like Rodgers is likely going to stay in Green Bay. And then obviously, apparently Rodgers, he gets he breaks up with his fiance, and now there's ties to Denver there where she apparently lives. And so like everyone was connecting the dots with Rodgers to Denver, but would he want to go to Denver if she's in Denver? And there's like all that side story going on a little bit too. And I feel like Denver's like the one spot for Rodgers that he would, potentially go to. Maybe Pittsburgh, but I don't see the Steelers really making a move like that. It's a very anti-Steeler type thing to do. They like to build more. And not give up those assets the way they would in order to get Rodgers. So to me, it's either Denver or Green Bay. And I think there's enough. And obviously the off the field stuff with the relationship with Rodgers is not, I'm not really taking that into consideration, but I just think there's a lot more pulling Rodgers back to Green Bay this year than there was last year.
Yeah, I don't know if Rodgers' ego could handle being the third best quarterback in a division. I'm just going to throw that out there right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look at that would be an absolutely insane division. Like if Rodgers has his choice, because obviously he's going to play 3 more years, let's say, just from a projection standpoint. Right. If he has his choice to go anywhere, does he really want to go compete with Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes, and even Derek Carr? I mean, like, is it something that you would want to do at the end of your career? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
I know we always like to knock Derek Carr here a little bit. He was only 5th in the league in passing yards this past season.
Why did you get him started, JJ? Why did you get him started? We talk buzzword. Don't say anything about Raiders, JJ. Thank you.
That's all right. I've already sent every possible free agent wide receiver to Vegas this year, including Devante Adams, connecting that Fresno State connection with Derek Carr.
Yeah.
But another receiver I've kind of sent there. We've all got these players we cannot quit in fantasy football. And regardless of what they've done to you and how they did you wrong, Allen Robinson, you can't quit them. And Allen Robinson is one of those guys I would love to see end up in Vegas there. Where would you like to see Allen Robinson playing in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, Vegas makes an insane amount of sense because they need a true X in that offense. They obviously have the slot guy and Hunter Renfrow. Darren Waller's great in the middle of the field as well. They need someone on the perimeter, and Allen Robinson is that guy. I mean, he's a great X receiver. Obviously, he had issues this past year. You can go in 2 directions, really. You can say, oh, this is the cliff for Allen Robinson, which I think there's a valid argument to that, because stylistically, Robinson is more on like the Dez Bryant spectrum, than he is a Larry Fitzgerald spectrum, if you will, as a wide receiver. And, we saw with Dez, I mean, he just fell off. And we see that with more of those physical wide receivers, that they can just fall off once they hit that 28, 29-year-old range. And so there is some fear that that's what is going on with Allen Robinson. There's also the other side where schematically that Bears offense was horrific this past year. Allen Robinson didn't have much to I mean, he wasn't this focal point in the offense. And so, from his perspective, I think that there was, or the argument could be that there was a little bit going on between the ears with him where, the motivation just wasn't there for obvious reasons. Right. And so I think that you can take it either direction. He's a highly volatile free agent, I believe, right now. But I do think from a fit standpoint, hypothetically, Vegas makes a lot of sense. I think you can make an argument for most wide receivers, but for an X like Allen Robinson, I think you can make an argument for the Chargers as well. With Mike Williams being a free agent, if they don't re-up Mike Williams, I think they're going to go after and try to get Mike Williams in because he works really well in that offense. But, I could see a scenario where they go out and try to get an Allen Robinson type as well to complement Keenan Allen.
Yeah, the next one I have here is a lot of question marks with this receiver coming off of an injury. Quarterback situation is a question mark. What are your thoughts on Chris Godwin?
Yeah, I mean, the injury is huge, right? It sounds like the way that he speaks about Tampa Bay is that he wants to be in Tampa Bay. And I think it makes sense. Like him and Mike Evans really do complement each other incredibly well, where Godwin can play that slot, play the middle of the field, arguably better than anyone, or at least brings a dynamic with his athleticism that other slot guys just don't bring. And then obviously having Evans on the outside and on the perimeter. So usually guys that are coming off injuries like that, it's tough for another team. Usually the team that they're on is the team that's going to give them the best deal because they've already been with that player. They know what that player does. There's not as much risk because they have that information. And so I think Godwin's going to stick in Tampa Bay. Whether they're one of those teams that goes after a guy like Watson, I know they've been tied to random quarterbacks out there, veteran quarterbacks. That remains to be seen. And that might dictate, what they do with a player like Godwin or even like re-signing Leonard Fournette and going that route because it's more of a win now type move. But, Godwin is still relatively young. I mean, he can still probably play for 5-6 more years in the league at a fairly high level. So I do think that Tampa Bay is going to be the squad for Chris Godwin.
And so what about, and I guess mine is just apparently like all of Tara in her Homer questions, but apparently, what about Mike Williams? You talked about him and the potential of him being replaced by maybe Keenan Allen there. And, he's a kind of an interesting one when you look at him because we've seen the incredible success. We've seen how dynamic he can be. We've seen how much time he can miss and how it can be up and down. But are there any teams that you can see him hitting the free market and fitting in with?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, he's another player where I really do feel like the Chargers are such a good spot for him, just in general. Justin Herbert being a big arm guy and Mike Williams being such a great down the field threat. I mean, there's arguably no better wide receiver in football that's better at 50-50 balls than Mike Williams is.
When he's
and yeah, when he's healthy, of course, like when he's on the field and able to perform. And I mean, you could make the same argument for a guy like Kenny Golladay when he's healthy. He's a great 50-50 ball guy too. But I really do think that the Chargers have a lot of cap space too. I think that they're going to be able to, there's a report today saying that Mike Williams is going to look for wide receiver one money, but I think that the Chargers, the way that I generally see the free agency landscape, and there's a lot of studies that people have done to say that like when a wide receiver switches teams, he usually sees a drop off in production. And, it's something to avoid in fantasy football, but there's a selection bias to that. And the selection bias is if a team is actually letting a guy walk, that means that team just doesn't think that player is very good, right? Like he clearly doesn't have a skill set good enough for them to re-sign him or want to re-sign him. That's why we don't see, amazing free agents hit the market every single year because teams are retaining them, right? They're signing them to extensions while they're already on the team. And so, it's not, generally speaking, if a player is talented enough, I think that the team that he was on existing is going to at least, give him an offer and go after him. And I think when the fit is there too, like we see with Mike Williams, like we see with Chris Godwin, I think it's just the easy bet to make for that kind of player. But, if you can match him with a strong arm quarterback, I mean, realistically, you can make the argument that he would be great in a Bills uniform, right? I mean, there's a lot of spots where, if you can match him with a strong arm quarterback, it makes a lot of sense. But I think that what the Chargers have right now at wide receiver, at least their top two, I think there's still some question marks with like Josh Palmer and such, but at least with their top two, if they can retain Mike Williams and have Keenan Allen there, continue to build their defense. We know that the roster is really talented. And so I think that he just is the guy that they should be going after.
Well, I'm a big Joshua Palmer fan there. I think the Chargers may be too. I think that may be somewhere where, like, you know what, Mike Williams, your best ability is your availability. Maybe we'll let you go, give this young guy a shot. But I mean, one, Mike Williams is on. He's on. We've seen in the beginning of the season what he was able to do. Now, when we look at this free agent group coming out there, potential free agents, we've got the Christian Kirks, the Michael Gallups, the DJ Charks. So if you're looking for a wide receiver, there's some solid secondary options there. James Conner, Leonard Fournette. These are another couple running backs. Did we miss any of these free agents that we talked about a little bit earlier that you say, you know what, Christian Kirk is a fantastic fit. Michael Gallup is a fantastic fit. Is there a free agent out there or two that you absolutely would love to see move on to a different team? And where's that team that you'd like to see him go to?
Yeah, so I'm going to go to Juju Smith-Schuster, who, over the last 2 years, I think that he's been sort of typecasted as being like a certain wide receiver, particular wide receiver, but so much of what's gone on with Juju over the last couple of years has been obviously the injury this past year, but even the year before that, where he was this like low A dot, super inefficient on a per target basis wide receiver, but obviously still a red zone threat, but it's the way the Steelers ran their offense. They have this horrific offensive line that they've had over the last couple of years. Ben Roethlisberger's getting the ball out quick because his aged body doesn't want to get sacked. And so, that's why part of the reason why we see the offense running through Deontay Johnson the way that it has been. And then Juju, when he's healthy playing the slot, he's seeing these like really quick, low average depth of target looks. And if you look at what he did through the first 3 years of his career versus the last two, the first 3 years, his percentage of deep ball targets was basically double what he's seen the last couple of years in terms of targets that went 15 plus air yards. And so and meanwhile, it's not like he like forgot to know how to catch the ball down the field. I mean, his catch rate was identical to what he was doing early on in his career. I don't think he's a perimeter wide receiver. I think that when Antonio Brown was there, it was very helpful for a guy like Juju to thrive. But at the same time, I think that he's a really, really good slot guy. He can generate a lot of yards after the catch, and I would love him in Kansas City. They don't have that presence. They have the presence in Travis Kelce in the middle of the field, but they don't have a true slot receiver that they've really been able to utilize, with Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, Tyreek Hill can play everywhere, but, having Hill stretch the field on the perimeter, Kelce's getting up there in age too. So to have someone sort of transition a little bit from where Kelce's at, and get some of those looks over to Juju just makes a lot of sense to me. And that offense is one where having that yak ability is important. So I think Juju in Kansas City make a lot of sense. And he's not going to be that expensive. I mean, last season he turned down offers that were like not very lucrative to stick with Pittsburgh. And even the Pittsburgh contract was not a lot of money. And so I don't think he's going to be that costly either for a team like Kansas City to try to get him.
Kansas City, there is that connection because last offseason, I think it was down to Kansas City and Pittsburgh before ultimately Ben Roethlisberger goes, hey, Juju, I want to run it back one more year. Are you in? Juju said, yeah, I love you. Let's go. Let's get this back. But he basically turned down Kansas City. So I think they could definitely circle back to that. And that could be a very nice match, which I do not like for the AFC West at all when it comes down to it. Because if you're giving more weapons to Patrick Mahomes, that's not a good thing, especially in that AFC. But we've seen how that AFC is shaped out there. The Bengals, Tyler Boyd, they've got their own free agent question. Buffalo, they've got their players there. I mean, you got to have a good offense now to keep up with the Joneses there in the AFC. Now, with that all being said, hey, this is our contractually obligated portion of the show. We broke down. We are going to get to Behind the Grind here in just a second. But hey, if you're still listening to us on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever that is, take a second, head to fantasypoints.com, enter promo code Vipers22 and get 10% off that Fantasy Points subscription today. And hey, make sure to check out the good old-fashioned late round podcast, fantasy football podcast there. In fact, there was one that just dropped today, right, JJ? I think you just had one that just kind of dropped here not that long ago. Basically talking about the rookie draft. We're in rookie season right now for fantasy football. Just want to touch base, kind of give a little bit of a little hint there for what people can expect.
Sure. Yeah. So I have a prospect model and that I've built and sort of enhanced every year. And so what I do is each year as sort of a primer, I look at successful NFL wide receivers and running backs in fantasy football. And I take that sample and I see how they did in college as producers. And usually, I always say that you can be a good college player and not be, from a production standpoint, and not be good in the NFL. But almost every good wide receiver and running back in the NFL was a good producer in college. And so we can look at sort of these baseline numbers of how these successful NFL wide receivers produced, and then sort of see which guys in this year's class match up to that sort of production. So I just sort of walk through that on that episode.
This feels like the anti-Laquan Treadwell type breakdown here. How to avoid Laquan Treadwell going forward right here. Now, stay tuned. We'll be right back here in just a second as we go behind the grind with JJ Zachariason. Here we go.